I survived. I still don't know exactly how. The last thing I remember before the silence was the sound of steel breaking against steel. Screams, earth being torn apart by hooves, and that weight in the chest that didn't come from a blow, but I was sure that no one would get. Out of there, it was supposed to be the end for all of us, but it wasn't for me when I woke up. The sky was gray, no sun, no direction. The air had that heavy smell of dried blood and old smoke. My body didn't respond properly. Every movement was slow, painful, like I'm being pulled back against my own will. I stayed there for a while, not knowing how much, just breathing, feeling, trying to understand why I was still alive. Around me, silence, no voice, no command, no flags raised, just bodies scattered, mixed friends and enemies, without any difference. War doesn't choose who deserves to stay, she just takes. I tried to get up. I failed on the first attempt, and the second I managed to support my arm by. The third time I was already standing, or at least something close to that. My armor was marked, cracked in some points. Dried blood glued to the metal, but not all of it was mine. That I knew. I looked at my hands. Tremendous. They still held the sword, even though I don't remember doing it. As if my body decided for me. As if he knew that letting go meant dying, I released it. Anyway, slowly the blade fell to the ground with a dull sound, heavy final. I took a deep breath, feeling the air rip inside, and I started walking, no direction, just moving, passing by faces I knew and others I've never seen, but now they shared the same fate. Every step was an effort, but stopping felt worse, because when I stopped, the memories came back. Fragments, confused, incomplete. The advance, the ambush, the siege closing, and then nothing. As if someone had erased the rest. I walked until I found what was left of our banner. Fallen, torn, almost unrecognizable. That should mean something, victory or defeat, but at that moment it didn't mean anything, because there was no one to see, no one to lift, no one to remember. I looked around once again, waiting to hear something, anything, but there was only the wind and the silence. It was then that I understood I didn't survive because I won. I survived because I was left forgotten, or maybe ignored, and that was worse, because it meant someone decided I wasn't even worth the final blow. I laughed bass. No humor, that kind of laughter. That doesn't come by choice, but for lack of another reaction. And then I started to get out of there, step after step, leaving the field behind the bodies. That day I didn't know how long it would take to get to the kingdom, but I knew I needed to go back. Not for honor, not out of duty, but because it was the only place that still made any sense. Even if little, even if nothing, the journey was long more than it should. My body didn't help. Hunger appeared first, then the headquarters, and finally, tiredness, the one who doesn't pass, the one that accumulates. I found water where I could, food when I was lucky, and shelter when the body couldn't take it anymore. But still I continued, because stopping for good was never an option. After days, or maybe more, I saw the walls in the distance, firm, intact, as if nothing had happened. As if the war hadn't touched that place. That should bring relief, but I didn't bring. I brought something strange. A different weight, hard to explain. I approached, slowly observing. The gates were closed. Guards positioned, everything as it should be normal, organized, far from the reality I left behind. When I got close enough, they saw me first with distrust, then with recognition, but not the kind I expected. There was no surprise, no relief, no respect. There was something cold, controlled, like I shouldn't be there. As if my presence was a mistake. One of them stepped forward, the hand on the sword, but it didn't pull, just held. As a warning, I stopped. I kept my distance. I waited, because at that moment all I had was this, wait for their reaction. And she came, but not as it should. He asked who I was, direct, without hesitation, without any sign that you knew me. I felt that more than any wound. Not for the question, but by the tone I replied, said my name, my position, the battalion, everything, exactly as it always was. He hit, without changing the expression. And then he looked at the other guard, a brief silence, short but enough. And then he came back to me, saying that that battalion didn't return, that everyone was dead, that no one survived. I was silent. No, because there was no answer, because at that moment I understood for them I was already dead, and the dead don't come back. Not that kind of battle. Not from that place. I took a step forward, instinctive, and that was enough. The swords were pulls. Fast, I need. As if they were already waiting for that. As if they had already decided before I even arrived. I stopped immediately, raising your hand slowly, showing that he was not a threat, even though it is treated as if the guard kept the blade. Pointed steady, no tremor, and he said something that stuck with me more than anything that day. He said I didn't belong there anymore, that the kingdom did not recognize the dead, and if I insisted on entering, I would be treated like an enemy. At that moment I realized. Survived the impossible battle. It was just the beginning. Why come back? It was another war, And this I still didn't know how to win. And this I still didn't know how to win. I stood still before them, the blades still pointed, the weight of it more real than any wound I brought from the field. It wasn't just rejection, it was denial, as if my existence, there was a mistake that needed to be corrected. I lowered my hands slowly, no sudden movements, without provoking, but also without completely retreating. Because a part of me still believed, I still insisted that it was a mistake, that someone there would recognize it, someone would say my name without a doubt. But that didn't happen. Their eyes haven't changed. There was no hesitation, just discipline, cold trained, as if they'd already been prepared for that, as if I wasn't the first. And it hit me in a different way deeper. If I weren't the first, then there were others. Others who returned, others who survived, and they were received in the same way. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, not physically, but inside me. I was wrong, very wrong. I took a deep breath, controlling the impulse to move forward, to force, to demand, because that would only confirm what they were already. Ready to do, eliminate me without questioning, no registration, no consequence. I took a step back, slow, calculated, and it made them relax just enough. They didn't lower their weapons, but they adjusted their posture like someone who sees a threat diminishing, but not disappearing. One of them spoke again, told me to go away, said there was nothing for me there, nowhere, no name, no story. As if everything I was erased. Along with the battlefield, I wanted to respond, saying it didn't make sense that I was there breathing, alive. But the words didn't come out because deep down, I was already starting to understand it wasn't about what I said. It was about what they believed or were told to believe. I looked beyond them, to the walls, to the towers, to the place I called home for so long, and I saw no recognition. I didn't see belonging, I saw distance. As if it had never been mine, as if I were looking at something that no longer included me. I took another step back, then another, and then I turned, no rush, no running, but with something heavy growing inside of me. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something quieter. Most dangerous doubt. I walked away from the gates, feeling their eyes still on me, tracking every move, making sure I really left, and only when the distance increased. When the walls no longer occupied my entire field of vision, I stopped. I looked back for a brief moment, and then I understood I couldn't just leave. Not like that. Not without understanding what was happening, because that wasn't natural. It wasn't just fear, no error, it was intentional. Someone decided we wouldn't come back. Someone decided that everyone would die regardless of what actually happened. And that changed everything. I put my hand to my chest, feeling the weight of the armor, and underneath it, something more, something I hadn't noticed before. A strange volume. I stopped. I frowned, and carefully I began to loosen the clips. The metal made a low sound as it gave way, and when I removed the protection, I saw a piece of fabric stuck. Inside, it wasn't part of my armor, it wasn't mine. It was bent, hidden, placed there without me noticing or without me remembering. I pulled slowly. Unfolding, the fabric was dirty, spotted, but there was something drawn on it, a symbol, simple at first glance, but wrong lines that did not follow a common pattern, curves that seemed to connect in an impossible way. I felt immediate discomfort when looking, as if it wasn't meant to be understood easily, like it wasn't meant to be seen. I turned the fabric, looking for more, and I found a smaller brand, almost erased, but their precision recorded that wasn't done by chance, not hidden for no reason. Someone put that on me during the battle or before it ends. And that meant someone got close enough. Without me realizing, without me remembering, I tried to pull from memory, force some image, some face, but I only found broken fragment. Sound, impact, confusion, nothing clear, nothing useful. I squeezed the fabric in my hand, feeling his weight grow, for the meaning that was a message or a warning or both. And if you were with me, so it wasn't by chance. I looked again at the kingdom, now further away. Colder, and I realized if I tried to go back from the front, I wouldn't go in, and even if you entered, would not be received. I would be deleted like a mistake to be corrected, but there were other ways. Other paths, routes soldiers learn, but they are not taught. The gate guards, forgotten entries, old passages, paths used in times of war or escape. Knew some, not all, but enough. And if there were answers, they were inside, not on the walls, but what was hidden behind them. I saved the fabric, carefully, as if that could disappear, or worse, being taken from me again. Adjusted the armor, I took a deep breath, and I started to move, no longer like someone trying to get home, but as someone who needed to enter without being seen, without being recognized, because now I was no longer part of that place. I was an intruder in the only place that once belonged to me, and that made everything even more dangerous because I knew the kingdom. But now the kingdom was also against me, and that made everything even more dangerous because I knew the kingdom. But now the kingdom was also against me. I kept away from the main roads, following uneven terrain paths that few used, or that they had already been forgotten. The type of route a soldier learns when he needs to survive and not just march. The sun was already starting to go down, casting long shadows perfect for those who don't want to be seen. I used this to my advantage, advancing the limits of the wall, observing, calculating, waiting for the right moment. That part of the kingdom wasn't as guarded as the main gate. Never been. It was old, the most worn stone, less movement, but still protected. Nothing there. It was simple. I got closer, keeping the body low, controlled, breathing. Every step thought out before it happens. I had been to that point before, but never like that. Never like someone trying to sneak in. And that changed everything. There was an opening, small, almost invisible from a distance. An old flaw in the structure known by few, used in times of war and forgotten in times of peace. Or at least that's what everyone believed. I knelt before her, running your hand over the stone, feeling the texture, confirming. It was still there, still functional, but tighter than I remembered. I started to remove some loose stones, slowly, without making noise, no rush. Every second that mattered. Any wrong sound could draw attention, and attention was exactly what I couldn't have. After a few minutes, the space was enough. Just enough to get through. I took a deep breath, and I started to move inside slow, forcing the body between the stone, feeling the metal of the armor scrape, holding onto some points, but I continued until I finally crossed. Falling on the other side with a light impact controlled, I stood still for a moment, listening, waiting. Nothing, no alarm, no voice, no steps. I was in, but that didn't bring relief. Brought tension, because now I wasn't trying to get in, I was trying not to be found. I got up slowly. The atmosphere was familiar, but at the same time strange. The constructions, the streets, everything was as I remembered. But there was something different, something subtle, difficult to point, but impossible to ignore. I started to advance through the shadows, avoiding open areas, avoiding direct light, moving like I never needed to before in that place, because before I belonged. Now I needed to hide. I walked through narrow alleys, old buildings, closed doors, silent windows. It was strange. The kingdom was alive, but it seemed quieter than it should have, more restrained, as if something is being kept under control. Or hidden. Eyes stopped for a moment, observing a wider street. The guards passed, talking low, but pay attention. More attentive than usual, I waited for them to walk away, and I continued following a path I knew well. A place where I could find answers, or at least begin to understand. The military archives were not easily accessible, but I knew how to get in, or at least knew how it used to be. As I approached the building, I noticed the first clear change. More guards, more control. That wasn't standard, not for that kind of place. I stayed in the shadows, observing, analyzing the movement. Something there had changed, and it wasn't much. I retreated without trying to force entry. Not yet. It would be a mistake, and I could no longer make simple mistakes. I needed another way, another approach, and then a detail caught my attention. A symbol, small, discreet, engraved on one of the side walls, almost imperceptible, but I recognized it was the same as the fabric, the same strange pattern, the same impossible lines. My body reacted instantly, an internal alert, strong, instinctive. That wasn't there by chance. I approached carefully, passing your hand over the mark, feeling the relief. Reason someone put that there inside the kingdom, within a protected area. That changed everything, because it meant that whatever was behind this, I was already inside long before I returned, long before the battle is over. I looked around, more attentive now, and I started to realize other brands, not so clear, not so visible, but gifts scattered like a hidden pattern, like a trail left only for those who know where to look, or for those who need to find. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension increase, because that confirmed something I was still trying to deny. This was not external. It wasn't an enemy coming from outside. This was already part of the kingdom. It was already infiltrated. Or maybe I was never an attacker. Maybe it was always there, hidden, waiting. I retreated again, returning to the shadows, but now with another consciousness, another type of vision, because the place I knew, it was no longer the same. And the more I looked, but I realized I wasn't trying to figure out what happened. I was trying to figure out how long this had been going on. And why didn't anyone see, or worse, who saw and decided to do nothing, That possibility stuck in my mind heavier than any other. Because if anyone saw and chose to ignore, so it wasn't just a secret. It was a decision, and decisions like this are not made without reason. I remained in the shadows, observing movement around the building. The gods remained alert. But now I saw, beyond the posturing, I saw a pattern, shorter shifts, looks that didn't meet by chance, discrete signals. Between them, this was no ordinary surveillance. It was control. Something was being protected inside, or kept away from wrong eyes. And at that moment, I knew I was one of those eyes. I needed to get in, but not directly. Not now. I took a few more steps back, going back the way I came, keeping enough distance to think. Without losing sight of the building, my mind started working fast, searching for roots, memories, faults, anything that could be used. and then I remembered a secondary entrance not for soldiers, but for maintenance. Ancient, little, used, but connected to the inside if it still existed, if it was still accessible. It would be the way I went around the block. No rush without attracting attention, mixing my movements with the shadows, until you reach the most forgotten side of the structure there. The movement was almost non-existent, the most worn out, while less cared for, as if no one expected anything to come from there. I searched carefully, looking over the stone, through the junctions, until you find a small wooden door, almost flush, with the wall disguised by time. Through the dirt but still there, I approached. I tested the handle, locked. As expected, I looked around, confirming that I was alone, and then I used force. Controlled need, the wood gave way with a low crack enough. I entered quickly, closing behind me. The inside was dark, just a narrow hallway. Dust smell of abandonment, but not completely. There were signs of recent use. Light almost imperceptible, but gifts I advanced, carefully feeling. Every step, avoiding any unnecessary sounds, the hallway led inside, connecting with more structured areas, and as I went along, the air changed, cleaner, more controlled, sign that I was approaching the main areas. I stopped before reaching the exit, leaning against the wall, listening. Voices, casualties, but close. I approached slowly, just enough to see two men. They were not ordinary guards, by posture, by the clothes, by behavior. They weren't there to watch, they were there to guarantee the difference was clear. One of them held a scroll, the other looked around, but not nervously. With calculation they spoke quietly, but I managed to capture parts. References, movements, and a word that made everything stop for a moment. Clinging, repeated more than once, no emotion. Weightless, like it's just part of the process. I understood immediately. The battle of the battalion, it wasn't just war, it was elimination, planned, controlled, and now they were making sure nothing was left. No records, no survivors. I held my breath, feeling confirmation take shape. They didn't expect anyone to come back, and when that happened, it was treated as an error that needed to be corrected. I backed away, slowly, without making a sound, every measured step, until I returned to the dark hallway. The heart beat faster now, but I can't or fear. For clarity, because now I knew I have not been forgotten. I was discarded, and someone made a mistake by not guaranteeing this to the end. I took my hand to the hidden fabric, feeling him their gift, and for the first time I started to consider another possibility. And if that wasn't left in me by chance, and if it wasn't an accident, and if it was exactly the opposite, a choice, a brand, a sign that I shouldn't die there. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, organizing everything, because every answer brought more questions, but it also brought direction, and direction was all I needed. I opened my eyes again, now different, more focused, more accurate. I could no longer act like someone trying to prove I was alive. I needed to act like someone who already understood that they were being hunted, and who needs to hunt back, but not with force. With intelligence, with silence. I looked ahead to the path that led deeper into the building, and then I followed without hesitation, because now every step wasn't just risk, it was advancement inside, something that had been happening for a long time, long before I realized. I know somehow it placed me exactly where I needed to be, even if it meant being alone against something much bigger than I initially thought. I kept moving forward, no rush, but without any doubt the building was no longer just a place. It was a piece of something much bigger, and I was inside it. I walked a few more meters, until the corridor opened into a wider area. Low lights and torches stuck to the walls and doors, multiple ports, all closed, all the same, but there was something different. The silence, it wasn't empty, it was controlled, as if every sound was removed on purpose. I approached the first door, I put my ear, nothing, not even breathing, no movement. I moved on to the next, and then a sound very light, almost non-existent, but real, a drag, slow, irregular. I held the doorknob, I took a deep breath, and I opened it slowly. What I saw made me stop for a moment. A man, slim, injured, bound by chains on his wrists, sitting on the floor, head down but alive. He looked up when the door opened. The eyes took a while to focus, but when they focused I saw recognition, not from me, but what I represented. A soldier, someone outside, someone who shouldn't be there. I closed the door behind me. Keeping sound to a minimum, I approached slowly, no sudden movements. He tried to speak, but the voice failed. Drought broken, I knelt, observing better the brands, the injuries. This wasn't just prison, it was extraction. Information to the limit and beyond. I spoke low. I asked how long he had been there. He took a while to respond, as if I needed to remember what time was. Days, maybe weeks, he didn't know for sure. But I knew enough. They came, they asked, and when the answers ran out, they continued. I felt something tightened inside me. It was no surprise, it was confirmation. I asked about others. He laughed, a dry sound. No strength, Said there were many but no more now. There were a few left and they were finishing. The word came again. No emotion. As before cleaning, I looked around the room, nothing more than what is necessary to keep someone alive, and conscious enough to talk. Enough to suffer, I asked who they were. Closed his eyes for a moment, and then he replied, they weren't just officers, not just guards. It was something above. Something that didn't appear, but he controlled everything. Orders that no one questioned, executions that no one recorded, and names that weren't said out loud. I felt the weight of it more than any battle I've ever faced, because this wasn't war, it was erasure, I asked. Why he was still alive, he took longer this time. But he responded because there was still something. They wanted something he hadn't yet given, I understood, and it got me thinking if he was there for something he knew, then the others who disappeared, they were also. Or were they? And I carried something even without fully understanding what it was. I put my hand on my chest again, feeling the hidden tissue, and for the first time I thought maybe that was the reason I looked at him, and I asked what happened when someone was no longer useful. He didn't respond with words. He just tilted his head slightly, indicating the floor. As if the answer was there underneath us, I was silent for a few seconds, absorbing, calculating, and then I made a decision. I got up, I went to the chains, I analyzed the fixing points rusty, but still firm. I used force gradual without making noise, until you feel the structure give way once to until it breaks. He didn't react right away. As if he didn't believe I helped him get up, the weight of his body partially fell on me, weak but alive. I couldn't leave him there. Not after, and everything, not after what I saw, but I couldn't just leave either. Not yet. There was more. There are more answers, more parts. And leave now, it would be going out, blind. I took him to the door. I opened it carefully. I looked down the hall, still empty, still silent. I needed a place. A safe spot, even if temporary. I started hanging out with him, slowly controlling every step, every breath. And as we went, I felt something change inside me. Because until that moment, I was trying to understand now. I was involved directly, no turning back. I was no longer just someone who survived. I was someone who saw, and who sees. You can no longer pretend you don't know. I stopped for a moment, listening again, steps distant, but coming in the right direction. I pulled him closer to the wall, seeking shade, seeking silence, and I stood still, waiting, observing, feeling every second extend, because now, any error, it didn't just mean my death. It meant ensuring that all that kept happening with no one to interrupt. The steps got closer, constant rhythm, no rush. Without hesitation, they were not ordinary. Patrollers, they knew exactly where they were going. I held the man tighter, keeping his weight on me, and I moved back a few centimeters, until you find a recess in the wall, almost invisible enough to hide us from direct line of sight. I controlled my breathing, slowing down the pace, forcing the body to remain still. Footsteps echoed down the hall, higher now, more defined to people, maybe 3. By the sound, I couldn't risk looking directly. Any wrong move, any shadow out of place, it would be enough. Passed a few meters away, talking low, but enough to understand. Incomplete report pending verification. And again, the same word, cleaning, always said as part of something bigger, as an inevitable step. When the sounds started to drift away, I waited. I didn't move immediately. I let the silence return complete. Only then did I take a deep breath, and I looked at the man next to me. He was tense, the wide eyes, as if every second there was the last. I brought my face closer and I spoke quietly, said, you need it. But when I said to trust me, he took a moment, but he agreed. No words. I started driving it again now. Pay more attention. Every corner, every opening, every possible threat. The corridor split ahead, a path led further inside, another seemed to rise. Lightly, I stopped, thinking fast. Going deeper meant more answers, but also more risk. Climbing could lead to an exit, or 2 less monitored areas. I needed to choose. But before I decided, the man squeezed my arm, weak but insistent. He pointed to the path that went up. His eyes carried something other than fear, recognition. He had already been taken there. Or had I seen something? I trusted not, for sure. But because at that moment, he was the only connection I had to what was happening inside. We followed the inclined path. His steps were dragging, but he tried. Every move seemed to cost more than it should, but he continued, and that said more than any words. We went up for a few minutes, until the environment started to change. Less humidity, more air, more signs of frequent use, but also more organization. This was not an abandoned area. Was active, planned. I slowed down even more, leaning against the walls, using every shade available, until we saw light ahead. No torches, but from a more open space. I approached, carefully observing. Before moving forward, it was a bigger room, with the central table, scattered maps, documents, and symbols marked at various points. That wasn't improvised. It was strategic. I quickly analyzed routes, regions, markings that coincided with recent battles, including the one I survived. But there was something more. Some areas were crossed out, as if they had already been completed, others still marked pendants. And then I saw a specific brand, different from the others. Most recent, most marked. I got a little closer, trying to understand, and I felt the man next to me stiffen. He recognized. I looked at him and he whispered, almost voiceless, said he was next. The next place, the next group, the next cleaning. I felt the weight of it immediately. It wasn't going to stop. It was not an isolated event. It was a process, continuous, organized, and efficient. I took a deep breath, trying to keep a clear mind, because now it wasn't just about me anymore. Not about surviving, it was about preventing, or at least understand enough to expose. But for that, I needed more. More proof, more details, more access. I started looking at the documents on the table without touching directly, memorizing as much as possible: names, dates, locations, standards, anything that could be useful. And then I heard something, a light sound. Behind me, I turned my face slowly, feeling the body react before the mind. Someone was there observing, and in that moment, I knew, may it be time to just observe. It was over without warning, no margin for error, because now is also part of what needed to be eliminated. I didn't turn around completely, not right away, because sometimes the first move decides everything. Adjusted the weight of the man next to me as if you were focused on him, as if I hadn't noticed anything, but my eyes were already looking for reflections, shadows, any clue. And then I saw, on the metal surface of one of the walls supports, a subtle reflection, a still silhouette observing. No rush, no attempt to hide, which made everything even more dangerous. Whoever it was, I wasn't worried about being discovered. I took a deep breath, keeping calm, and then I turned around slowly, no sudden gesture, no apparent tension. The figure was there a few steps away, clean garments, no armor, no visible insignia. But there was something in the posture and the way he kept himself that made it clear that wasn't a guard, not a simple messenger. He was someone who didn't need to prove authority. She was already there in the eyes. He watched me as if he already knew. As if he were waiting, I remained silent, without taking the first step. Without delivering more than necessary, the man next to me went rigid. Full body locked, he also recognized. But unlike me, he was scared, real fear deep. The kind of fear you don't learn in battle. You learn in captivity. The man in front of me finally spoke. The calm voice controlled. He asked how I got there. There was no surprise in the tone. Just interest, as if the answer were just another detail. I considered lying, but I discarded it immediately. There was no room for that. He already knew enough. I just replied that I walked, that I survived, and I came back. His eyes changed. Slightly, almost imperceptible, but I saw that confirmed something for him, not for me. He took another step forward, no rush, no direct threat. But every movement carried intention, said I shouldn't have come back. That some destinies are defined by a single chance, and that I had already had mine. I felt the weight of those words. Weren't just a statement, they were a rule I had broken. I asked about the battle. Direct, bluntly, and for the first time he showed something close to real. Interest said, it wasn't the battle, never been, that was necessary to ensure stability, control, order. Carefully chosen words to hide what they really meant. I lightly pressed the fabric under my clothes, feeling him there, and then I asked if that was also part of the order. The rooms, the prisoners, the cleaning silence returned for a moment, but it wasn't discomfort, it was calculus. He was deciding how much was worth. Sane. And then he replied, said, the kingdom cannot survive with uncertainty. What threats need to be eliminated before growing, and that sometimes soldiers themselves become risks. I felt something cold run through my body, because now it was clear there was no error, there was no accident. Me and everyone else, we were chosen before the battle even begins. I looked straight at him, without deviating, and asked why I was still alive. He tilted his head slightly, looking more closely, as if that was the only question that really mattered, and then he replied, said I shouldn't be, but sometimes even well-executed plans leave residue and waste. Can be useful if they are understood in time. My gaze narrowed, because that confirmed what I had been feeling. I wasn't just a mistake, I was something they were still trying to understand, and that it was the only reason I was still breathing. The man next to me tried to back away, instinctively, but I held on tight. There was nowhere to go. Not there. The man in front of me took another step. Now, closer, the eyes fixed on me, and said, I carried something that shouldn't have survived, and that they needed to recover or destroy. Depending on what it was, I didn't respond, but my hand tightened its grip on the hidden fabric, and in that moment I knew it. Didn't matter what happened next, that inside me was the center of everything. Not the battle, not the kingdom, no treason, but that, and I was the only one who could still decide what to do with it. The silence between us became heavy, loaded, ready to break, because now there was no more room for Words just for choice, and every choice there it had a cost that could not be reversed. The silence didn't last long, because at that point staying still was already a choice. And any choice would be interpreted. I watched the man in front of me. Every detail, controlled breathing, the fixed gaze, the total absence of doubt. He wasn't there to negotiate, I was there to finish. I felt the weight of it, but I didn't back down. Not this time. My mind worked fast, looking for any advantage, any opening, and then I realized something. He was focused on me, totally, as if everything else in that space had ceased to exist, and that it was a mistake. Small but enough. I adjusted the body slightly, changing the position without looking like an attack move, but preparing, and then I said, "Base." I asked what exactly they thought I was carrying. The question was not to be answered. I was supposed to win a second, maybe two, and it worked for a moment. His eyes changed, not of confusion, but evaluation, as if deciding whether it was worth responding. And in that interval, I moved fast. I pushed the injured man aside, taking him off the hotline, and I advanced. Not to attack directly, but to break the distance, to force reaction. He reacted faster than any common soldier, deflected efficiently, trying to control my movement. "Don't kill me." What confirmed they needed me alive, or at least integer. That gave me room. I used his own movement, rotating the body and hitting with the weight, seeking to unbalance. Don't win, not yet, but create space. The impact was enough. He took half a step back. Enough. I didn't wait. I pulled the injured man again, and I moved out of the room without looking back, because looking would be hesitating, and to hesitate it there was to end. We ran down the hall, or as close to running as possible. In that situation, the footsteps behind us came soon. Controlled, no despair. He didn't need to run. I knew the environment, I knew the paths, and I knew I didn't have many options. I turned at the first turnoff, then another, changing the route, trying to break predictability. But the building seemed smaller now, as if every path leads back to the same place. The man next to me tripped, almost fell. I held, forcing him to continue. Even if every step was an absurd effort, I couldn't leave him behind. Not after all. And also because he still knew things I needed. A metallic sound echoed a head block. They were closing exits, isolating sectors, turning the building into a controlled trap. I stopped for a second, evaluating, heavy breathing, but clear mind. Going back was not an option, neither does going straight forward. So I chose the unpredictable, a side door, minor, almost forgotten. I opened, and we entered, closing behind us. The space was tight, full of boxers. Old storage, but useful. "Why did you hide?" I supported the man against one of the walls, and I went to the door, touching your ear. The steps passed non-stop. They moved on. For now they went back to him. He was worse. Irregular breathing, the body failing, but still aware. He looked at me and said something that changed everything. Said that what I carried, it wasn't information. It was not an ordinary object. It was proof of something that couldn't exist, something that would take down more than just men. I felt the impact of it immediately, because it meant that it didn't just threaten those who were there, threatening the throne itself, the entire structure. I asked Kalinu. He responded with difficulty, said he heard during interrogations, names being mentioned, orders from above, far above, and fear, real fear, not from external enemies, but of what could be. Revealed, I closed my eyes for a moment, connecting everything, the battle, the disappearances, the rooms, the cleaning, and now that I wasn't just a survivor, I was a direct risk to something that was rooted much deeper than I imagined. I opened my eyes, feeling something different, not just urgency, but direction. I no longer needed to understand everything. I needed to leave, take that with me, and make sure it didn't disappear like the rest. I helped him get up again, even knowing that would be more difficult. Now I went to the door, opening slowly. The hallway was empty. But the silence had changed. There was no more control. It was hunting, and now I wasn't just running away anymore. I was carrying something that could destroy it all. If I could make it out alive, I left first, observing every detail of the hallway. Nothing in sight, but that didn't mean safety. It meant they were repositioning themselves, thinking, anticipating. I pulled the man with me, keeping him as close as possible. Controlling the sound of footsteps, every move needed to be calculated now more than ever. Because it wasn't just about escaping, it was about leaving no trace. I followed the corridor opposite the previous flow. Choose based on instinct, but also in standard. They were closing. When exits is so secondary paths would still have gaps. For a little while, but enough, we go down again. A narrow staircase, poorly lit. The heavier air, more stuffy, but also more isolated. Less circulation, less direct surveillance. The man next to me could no longer keep up. The body gave way with each step. I stopped. I held him tighter, and I looked into your eyes. Said he needed to continue. Even if it was the last effort, he tried to respond, but he just nodded. And that was enough. We follow until the path ended at a Reinforced door different from the other's youngest. More protected. I touched the surface. Cold. Solid. That wasn't a common way out. It was containment or protection. Maybe both. I looked around. No other way. No alternative. So that was the ticket. I started looking for a mechanism, some way to open, but before I found the man next to me pulled my clothes. Weak but insistent, he pointed to his own chest, then for me, then to the door. I understood it wasn't about strength, it was about what I carried. Hesitated for a second, but there was no more room for doubt. I took my hand to the hidden fabric for the first time since it all started. I removed it, carefully feeling the real weight of it, non-physical, but for what it represented. It was small, compact, but clearly protected, made to resist, built to last. I approached the door, not knowing exactly what to expect, but the moment I pulled over, something happened. One click down, almost imperceptible, and then the structure gave way, not completely, but enough. As if recognizing, as if accepting, the door slowly opened, revealing a space different from anything I had seen so far. Cleaner, more organized, no signs of abandonment. This was not a forgotten area. It was a protected area. One entered first, pulling the man right behind, and I closed the door. The sound of the fitting was dry, definitive. I looked around. Tables, files, official seals, and symbols that were not displayed in public. That wasn't just part of the system, it was the core, where decisions were recorded, where truths were hidden, and where lies were made. Official. I approached one of the tables. The documents were organized, cataloged as if it were routine. And maybe it was. I started leafing through fast, but pay attention. And then I found battle records, but not how I lived. How they planned, names listed, marked before they even leave, including mine, with a note next to it. Note required. I felt the blood cool because that confirmed everything. It wasn't chance. It wasn't a mistake. It was the intention from the beginning. The man next to me fell to his knees, the body finally giving in. But before that, he held my arm and said with what little voice I had left that it couldn't die there, that someone needed to see. I looked at him and I sat, no words, because there was nothing left to say. I already knew. From the moment I understood that there was no going back, I gathered as much as I could, documents, records, anything. That proves, and I kept it next to what I already carried now. It wasn't just an item, it was a set of complete truth. Heavy, dangerous, but necessary. I got up, listening in the distance, muffled sounds. They were close, closer than before. Maybe they already knew exactly where I was. Maybe that door, it wasn't a secret. For everyone, only for those who shouldn't enter. I looked around one last time, writing everything to memory, because even if I couldn't take it all, I would still carry enough. I went to the door again. I took a deep breath, and I prepared, because now it wasn't just about leaving anymore. It was about ensuring that all that wouldn't be buried again. Even if it meant that I wouldn't come out with the truth, I remained motionless. For a few seconds, feeling the weight of everything that was in my hands. It wasn't just paper, it wasn't just proof, it was the end of a version of the world, and the beginning of another. I took a deep breath, controlling the body, because what came now couldn't be done in a hurry, not with impulse. I needed to leave, but not anyway. I needed to go out and make sure it survived. Even if I didn't survive, I looked at the man lying next to me. His breathing was already weak, irregular, but still present. I knelt, I brought my face closer and said low that it wouldn't be in vain. Anyone would know. He tried to react, but the body no longer responded. The eyes stayed fixed on me for a moment, and then they lost their strength. I stayed there for a second in silence, not out of grief, but through recognition, because he resisted until the end and gave me more than any order had ever given me. Direction? I got up, without looking back again, because carrying that was enough. I went to the door, I put my hand in open. The hallway on the other side was no longer empty. They were there, three of them, stopped waiting. No surprise, no rush, as if they knew that moment would come. The man I had seen before was ahead, the eyes fixed on me. Now, without any disguise, this was no longer an attempt at containment. It was closure. I held what I carried more tightly, feeling the volume under close, and I took a step forward, no backing down, without trying to escape, because at that point, running would just be postponing. And I was no longer there to postpone anything. He spoke, said there was still a choice, that I could deliver, and it would all end quickly. Clean, the same word always. The same word. I let out a light breath through my nose. Almost a laugh, no humor, just understanding. And then I replied, said he'd seen what they called cleaning, and there was nothing clean about that. Silence settled for a moment, heavy but unlike the previous ones. Now it was final. I moved first, but not against them. Against space, I threw one of the documents on the floor, sliding across the floor in their direction enough to break the pattern, enough to force reaction. And the moment the eyes looked away, I advanced with all that was left. Not to win, but to pass, to break up. The impact came. Fast, violent, but I didn't stop. I ignored the pain. I ignored the body asking me to give in, and I continued pushing, forcing, making way under your own weight. One of them tried to hold me, but I turned, breaking contact. Another came from the side, but it was too late. I was beyond them. Running now, no hiding, without measuring sound, because there was no more reason. The runners passed quickly. Every curve, each door recorded in memory. Guiding my steps they came after I listened faster, now more direct, but I already had the advantage. Not by force, but decision, I reached the secondary exit, the same one where I came in the woods. Still compromised, I pushed hard and she gave in. The light from outside hit me strong, almost blinding for an instant. But I didn't stop. I continued until you gain distance, until the air changes, until their sound is left behind. I only stopped when I could no longer hear anything other than my own breathing. Heavy, irregular, but live. I looked around. The city remained the same. Normal movement, people living, no idea what existed behind the walls. Not knowing what was being done in the name of the order, I put my hand on my chest, feeling everything still there intact. And for the first time since I came back, I didn't feel doubt. No confusion, not anger, just clarity. Because now I knew exactly what needed to be done. Not as a soldier, not like someone who follows orders, but as someone who saw and survived long enough to tell. I started walking without looking back, because what remained, it would disappear, be erased, as it always was. But this time, something had come out together, something that could no longer be contained. And as I walked away, blending in among the people, I understood that the battle I survived it was never the hardest, the most difficult. It was the one that started there. No sword, no open field, but with something much more dangerous, the truth.